The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and welcome to today's online forum, Leadership in Times of Transition. Today is being hosted by Dr. Scott Paine, our Director of Leadership and Education with the Florida League of Cities University. Today is part of a monthly series promoting hot topics for our membership in leadership, ethics, and public opinion. Now, before I introduce Dr. Paine, a few housekeeping items before we get started. Number one, first and foremost, this session is being recorded and we will be posting the session on our FLCU website as well as our YouTube channel by the end of today. I'll have materials posted alongside of it, the recording as well, on FLCU University's website. But if you'd like to access those materials in advance, you can find them in the handout section on your docking panel, which should be on the right side of your screen. It is an online forum, and by forum we mean that we want you to participate. So you can submit questions by either using the chat function or the questions widget, which is again on the right-hand panel of that docking station for today. Finally, if you have if you are joining us as a recording and have questions that you'd like to submit or follow up, I'll be sure to provide you with the email address spaine@flcities.com. That's SPAINE@flcities.com. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Scott Paine.
Thanks, Holly. Appreciate you being here as always to make sure all of it runs the way it's supposed to run. My guest today is someone who'll be familiar to folks across the state of Florida. She's the former mayor of Orlando and currently a trustee with the Urban Land Institute, Glenda Hood. Glenda, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Scott. I'm glad to be with you.
Now, I'll let folks know with the wonders of technology that we're in 3 different locations, and it is possible we might get some interesting background noise, not to be concerned. The technology will allow us to continue. If you hear a little sound of a woodpecker or something, that's just, I think, Mayor, that you're up in North Carolina at present. Is that right?
I am, yes. Thank you.
What we're going to talk about today is transition. It's a natural topic 2 days after our national election, and we're going to talk specifically about the issues associated with leadership in times of transition. 2 dominant themes. First, we're going to talk about leading an organization through a period of transition, coming in as a new leader or coming with it or having a new team or a new task. And then we'll talk a little bit about leading ourselves through that time of transition. I want to set up the conversation about leading an organization with a couple observations about how public organizations change. And the first of these actually isn't about elections and isn't about new leaders. It's about our labor force. One of the things that we know about public employees, and particularly public employees at the local and state level, is that compared to the rest of the market, so looking at the private sector, we actually in general have a more stable workforce. People tend to stay in local government and stay in their particular positions longer than they tend to in many private sector positions. That said, there are some areas where turnover is very high for a variety of reasons, and across the state and local public sector we are seeing that turnover, separations from government agencies, is increasing. I've got a little graph I pulled together with some data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This comes from, in case you're interested, something called their JOLTS report. You might have some fun figuring out what that acronym stands for. This is a monthly separation chart, so it's talking about how many people leave positions in the public sector, the particular position they hold, either at the state or local level, each month. So in 2007, just before the end of the rise in the real estate market here in Florida, we saw a turnover rate of about 1.1% per month, or about 13% per year that we would see in public sector employment. It increased as many communities had to cut back and workforces were reduced because of the lost revenue. And then we see from 2010 to 2012 that that rate of separation actually decreased largely that's because as the local governments and state governments began a process of regrouping and had trimmed their workforces about as much as they could, people who were working in the public sector didn't see a lot of opportunity for mobility, just as people in the private sector did not. The unemployment rate was high. There wasn't a good time to be on the market, so people tended to be staying put. But since 2012, you can see on this chart that there's been a steady growth in our separation rate at state and local government employment. And so now we're actually looking at an annual separation rate based on these kinds of numbers of 20% or more, about a fifth of our workforce. So that's a serious kind of transition to be dealing with month by month by month in the workforce team that we have in any particular office. Of course, the second and most dramatic kind of transition that happens systematically in the public sector concerns the transition of leadership. And of course, we are weathering the recovery from having been through a rather vitriolic campaign season, but the leadership is changing in Washington, which not only affects people working in government in Washington, but of course we can anticipate policy changes that are going to affect what we do at the municipal level. We're also seeing here in Florida a change in the leadership in our state legislatures. We have an incoming House Speaker, an incoming Senate President with somewhat different agendas, somewhat different concerns. Those things will affect us at the local level. And of course in our own cities, we even had a number of elections this past Tuesday in municipalities across the state, new mayors, new council members. So there is a transition that takes place in the leadership up and down the federal system that affects what we do at the municipal level. That kind of makes it important for us to be thinking about how we as leaders can lead an organization through a process of transition. And that's why I asked Glenda Hood to join us to give us some thoughts about specifically if we're leading an organization through a period of transition, whether it's because we're the new leader or there's a new task or we've had a major change in our staff, what some of those concerns are. So first and foremost, if we were to pick one thing that we need to do coming in, thinking about what we already have in the organization when we're going through a transition, Glenda, what would you say that we ought to focus on first?
Well, I think there's a number of things, and I think right now when you talk about organizational transition, there are heightened challenges. I mean, you certainly talked about one with more people leaving the labor force, and that's because of retiring baby boomers. I mean, I think in the public sector we've seen that, especially in the public safety area for a number of years, and now it's across the board. And then there's the challenge of the demand for more accountability and performance in both public and private sectors. And then that speed and complexity of technology. You know, if we're not totally proficient in every way with technology, then we're not going to be able to be accountable and perform in the way that we want to. So when you talk about organizational transition, I think those healthiest organizations that I've come in contact with, they know how to be thoughtful in their planning as well as their implementation as they look forward. And they know how to acknowledge and address both pitfalls and opportunities that may arise. And they look at things like, what's the feature that's worth preserving? You know, you want to preserve the very best things in your organizations. You want to promote stability, and yet you want to foster that innovation and performance. You want to balance any uncertainties of change with your employee needs for job security and direction and job satisfaction. And so preserving those things that are best when you're looking at transition, you know, there's some things you want to leave behind, and there's some things that you want to keep. And it can be how you sort out quality and competencies. It can make sure that the continuity is there where things are working well. It can be things as simple as your mission, vision, your goals, your management philosophy, your hiring practices, how you train and develop your personnel, you know, your financial stability, partnerships, collaborations, leadership decision-making, innovation capacity, things like that. But you need to, as an organization starting to transition, you need to identify which of those things are working, which do we want to keep in place for the future. It's part of that culture we want to keep. And then you want to decide what's okay to leave behind. How can we make things better? How can we seize more opportunities? And kind of reminds me, I was doing some work with a community bank through my business, and the bank was going through not only a merger with another community bank, but then ultimately ended up by being bought by a much larger bank. And they were having some difficulty as far as identifying what were the good qualities of the past that were worth preserving. So whether it's public sector or private sector, it's good to have those formal written transition plans when you're going through that, because that develops your time frames and your mileposts. And it gives you that tool for communicating with all of your stakeholders. But I think most importantly, Scott, it gives you direction and accountability with the process through which you're going. So I would say that's the very first thing you want to do.
And I can hear if I'm a member of the team being led through transition, so I've been there for a while, I hear the importance of the message the leader sends when the leader, through whatever process, working with the current employees, doing whatever they're doing, identifies the good things that already exist that you're already doing. It says to me, as a member of the team who's been there for a while, look, you've been doing good things. This isn't, we're throwing it all out. You've done some good stuff and we're keeping that, which probably helps secure buy-in from that individual as you move into the transition.
Absolutely it does. And that's why it's also important to have those right people, that strong management team in place. You know, I think nowadays we look at shared leadership, that teams being pulled together that really complement one another's assets and that compensate for one another's deficits. No one person has all the answers. And so the stronger the team you have that is really identifying not just what's worth saving from the past, but what direction do we want to go in the future, you know, more widely dispersed leadership is really going to give you the greater chance for weathering a transition with your organization, giving people, you know, the flexibility and ability to make decisions, to participate, to build that community within. And it makes me think of, you know, some companies who I think have really done an outstanding job, Whole Foods or Red Hat, a software development company, and they really believe in participation by all of their employees and transparency in every way, shape, and form, and kind of open organizations to participate, or what I know the Red Hat CEO calls meritocracy, which is being developed and adopted by so many organizations across the board. In fact, again, through my work, I've been working with a city in South Florida, and they are very much trying to change their culture with their management team to make sure that, you know, there is every avenue by which people can participate and be involved, and that transparency is there. So it inspires and motivates and empowers people. And I think that's very important to think about these days, Scott.
When we look at putting the team together, I know there's a conversation people often will have about whether you're trying to, when you think about the right people and you think about the orientation and training or the onboarding you're going to do for them, some people will focus, some organizations will focus on finding the skill set, their particular package of skills that they want, and some tend to focus on attributes that have to do with the existing culture of the organization or the desired culture of the organization, and bringing people in who seem to grasp that, to appreciate that, to bring that, when they bring themselves into the organization, they're bringing someone who embraces so much of what's already in or sought in the culture of the organization. What are your thoughts about how one makes choices in bringing the right people in, whether it's employment or building the team? Is it culture first and then skills? Is it skills first and then culture? What's your thought?
Well, I think it's a combination. First of all, you want competent people. And I think it's always healthy, and it's in my experience that I want people who I know are competent and who are open to new ideas and to change and to opportunities for the future, who have been there and who kind of have that lore or the stories, the history of the organization. And so that keeps things flowing smoothly. I also want to bring in new skill sets and to make sure that those are individuals who can develop as they're adopting that culture of the organization. And so, again, I think you want a healthy mix of both. And then I think it's important also to even reach beyond your organization and to ask people outside the organization, but people with whom you've had collaborations or network opportunities, and find out, how do they see the organization? How do they see the individuals who are working within the organization? We don't like secrets and surprises, especially in the public sector, and certainly the private sector doesn't either, because those can undermine so much. So, those stories, those practical tips, the lore of the organization, which makes up the culture, is as important as the formal procedures or policies or training and employee development that you have in place, and to have that combination of people with the history who are open-minded and willing to accept change, and those new people bringing new ideas in. I think that's important, again, as I said, with people outside the organization. So it's kind of all of the above.
Do you have, from your experience, a story of one of those teams that was built that included both, if you will, kind of the old and the new, the experienced and the less familiar?
Yes, I do. Well, when I went up to Tallahassee to become Secretary of State, of course, there were many people who were working in the Department of State who had been there for many, many years. And, it was kind of, they were used to one way of doing business. And I brought in a number of new people with new ideas, some people from local government, some people from the private sector, and it was a little bit of a struggle in the beginning for people to all get on the same page, because when people are accustomed to doing things one way, it's difficult to change. We all know that. And when people bring new ideas into the mix, others are a little suspect of that from time to time. So we'd sit down and we'd talk about it. And we developed, shared visions and shared ideas, and we'd celebrate every opportunity that came along. And we built trust, and I think that's very important as well. If you can build trust within an organization, it's going to pay off in dividends. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's certainly something that an organization must have. And I think if you look at your best leaders, it's the ones that have built trust and have given people the opportunity to participate, and it builds the morale with those right people. It improves your results. It reduces any conflict that might be out there. And it also really kind of starts knitting that fabric of continuity for the future, because it's very deliberate and it's very intentional.
When we were talking before, you talked about some of the things that the team, once you formed them, needed to be able to do in order to become a stronger team, things that help to build and sustain those relationships, things that help to build the trust you're talking about. And I was intrigued by one of your comments, the notion that it was really important for the team to complete important work.
Yes, it is. I think during transition, there are significant business issues in both the private and public sector that shouldn't be left unfinished. And you can look at it from two perspectives, Scott. I think sometimes a great gift to the successor that comes into an organization is that that unfinished business is taken care of. But I think we all know that that is mostly unrealistic because you can never check off every box and have everything complete. So when new leadership comes in, I think it's important to identify, what's important, what's the status, what's the relevant information that's been marshaled around this work or an initiative. And then you build confidence within your team and within the community beyond if you can finish that work. And so, for the outgoing leadership, they can certainly ease transition when they anticipate and identify any of these issues or initiatives for their successor, especially around personnel or financial or legal. But I think also that new leader and that new leadership team does a favor to the organization if they can identify what's really important to complete first, what important work will build morale and build success for the team and build that trust again.
It's the notion of the quick wins, getting a few things done so that people know, hey, we can do this, this new team can work, this new leadership has a clue, some good things are going to happen.
Exactly, exactly. That is so important. And I can think of, a variety of things over the years when I've taken over the leadership of an organization or certainly different things at the city when I, would move people around and I'd observe them. When they could have that quick win, if you will, but that significant win that really benefited the organization as a whole, it did so many things within and built that level of confidence and trust again outside in the community. And I think today more than anything, trust is so valuable and so important, and having that mutual respect for one another. And I think when you can accomplish some of this important work right away. I have a colleague that I've worked with over the years who's just taken on a new position with a nonprofit organization. And there were quite a few initiatives that were not accomplished yet as the predecessor moved on. And one of the things that she is most focused on now is making sure that those things are accomplished. And already in just a short period of time, it's paid dividends because people feel that then that transition is happening seamlessly and in a smooth fashion. And I think often we'll see with organizations, and I'm not going to say it's more so in the public sector than the private sector, but often you'll see where there's almost a feeling that, well, I'm not going to help my successor, or I'm not going to sit down with them and show them and talk to them about, some of the issues that they might encounter. And I think if we can get beyond that and not feel any type of jealousy or feel any way, shape, or form that we need to continue to compete with whoever's following us in a leadership position, then the organization is going to be better as a whole. And it makes us realize that it's the organization we need to think about. It's not the individual.
I definitely want to come back to that idea in a little bit when we start talking about leading ourselves. I really
I got a little bit
point,
into individual.
No, that's fine. I think it's a very important though. But I want to back up just for a moment because this word relationship is a tricky word in the workplace because people sometimes equate relationships with the personal, perhaps becoming the more intimate personal kind of relationship. And one of the things that you noted as you're moving forward with an organization in transition is the team that you're building, the team you're working with, you need to be working on and sustaining those relationships between the various members of the team and between the leader and the members of the team.
Exactly. I think relationships are at the heart of leadership, whether it's organizational leadership or individual leadership. And, you know, in an organization, we recruit and select that wide range of stakeholders. And so those are relationships that we're building as we put those individuals in place, or as we work with people who are already within that organization. So those relationships are important. And I think there can sometimes exist some ambivalence when you're going through a change or a transition. So it may sound odd, but I've always said you kind of need to allow a time for grieving, if you will, within that change of the organization. But you also need to kind of be artful in creating opportunities to celebrate all those small accomplishments. It's kind of like a rite of passage in my mind, because you're looking at some people who are left behind and they'll no longer be with the organization, and you need to, you know, have a party and celebrate their great accomplishments. There's some that you're promoting or you're moving into different responsibilities through a transition, and you need to celebrate that as well with a gathering or recognition. And then those who come on board who are new, and you celebrate those new people as well. An example that comes to mind with my work with the Urban Land Institute, I do a lot of work with the Advisory Services Program, and I go with teams of individuals into communities and look at different organizational development or community issues for them. And I was working with the University of Denver over the summer. They have a new president, and the new president has set some new directions. But there's a lot of people who are somewhat set in their ways, who have been with the university a very long time.
That never happens in universities. That never happens.
No, it never happens. But the new president, as I observed her and as we were giving recommendations for how they could better develop their campus, better integrate into not only the surrounding community, but the whole community of the city and county of Denver, and could really be a leader in many ways with different initiatives in the community. I observed the president sitting through different sessions, and as we would hear people who had been at the university a long time, they'd say, well, Dr. So-and-so, who was 2 presidents before, always did it this way, and we, you know, think this is good. She never was ruffled. She never got upset. She would present a new idea, and they would think it was their idea in the way that she presented it. And she was building that team, building that confidence, building those relationships that were going to be sustained into the future, just like obviously relationships had been sustained with previous presidents. So it takes time, but it's very, very important. And relationships of all kinds are important. Those internal ones, the people, your team that you have in place, those external ones with the partnerships and collaborations in the community, and then sometimes the unlikely relationships that we'll build in the community as well. People that you never thought would get on board or join the team. If you can entice them, encourage them, inspire them in some way, utilize their skill sets, ask them to participate, invite them to sit at the table. Even though you know you may not agree, you may find, and I often did, that I really agreed more than I disagreed. And so I built very strong relationships that way. And again, I see organizations that approach things in that manner being much more successful.
And that also ties in so strongly to your last point in this particular slide we have up, which is the importance of communicating so much so that we repeated it. The real need, and as communicating in so many ways, I think often we can fall into the habit of thinking of communication as a one-way activity, as a leader perhaps what in the network world we'd call a one-to-many communication. So I'm the leader and I'm going to communicate to you, meaning I'm telling everybody what to do. I don't think that's what you were after when you emphasized the importance of communication in building a team in transition.
Not at all. It is a two-way street, and that's why I said communicate, 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 because you want to utilize every tool you have, and you want to put the information out to everyone, internally and externally. But you also, again, you want to invite people's ideas. Get them to that table. That kind of gets back to that meritocracy idea that's so prevalent now, especially in the corporate world, where every avenue is utilized to ask people to give new ideas, to participate. Ultimately, you know, it's the CEO, the mayor, the city council that will, you know, make a decision. But when you've included people in the decision-making process and asked them to participate, that direction of communication, everyone's going to have buy-in, and everyone's going to accept the end result. And, you know, that's how the culture becomes stronger. That's how the ideas and opportunities are seized. And that's how I believe an organization becomes more successful. You're reassuring your stakeholders by communicating. You're establishing a sense of direction for them. You're certainly inserting accountability when you communicate to people. Now, this doesn't guarantee, you know, a perfect transition, but I think by communicating properly and keeping it two ways with information out and participation in, it certainly can reduce any uncertainty and help your chances of success for the future. So I am a very strong believer in communication, one-on-one, team-on-team, organization to organization, you name it. Communicate, 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 Scott.
You know, and in the public sector, we have some formal processes by which we communicate with the public, and I'm thinking back to my time on council, and I know you were involved in transportation issues, Orlando being so much at the center of what's happening in that part of Florida, and there's an awful lot of transportation concern given the huge volume of tourists that you have coming through. I remember back at one point, this is in the 90s, when the Department of Transportation was going out for public input, that they would do these dog and pony shows with posters and so on, and you'd have a place where you could write your comment. And then when the report came out about the plan, nothing changed in the plan. All the comments were reported in the back, and most of them were typically just dismissed.
Exactly. And I think that's the way of the past, Scott. And yet there are still some governmental organizations, as we know, who, especially at the state level, I'm going to pick on them a little bit more than local, because I think at the local level we've understood because we're constantly communicating with the people we serve. But at the state level, you can kind of stay a little more isolated. And recently, I've had an experience working with an agency at the state level where they still do exactly what you said. They have a public hearing. People can make a comment, or they can put their comment on a card. But I sat through one, and everybody that stood up said, well, I'm here to give my opinion, but I know no one's going to listen. So I'm not sure why I really came tonight. Or, you know, they'll say the same thing when they write down their comment. Well, that's not the way that we should do things. That's not the way that we should communicate. And, you know, I can look in the past with my own time as mayor, and when you talk about public transportation, we were trying very hard, and you've heard this story before, to have light rail. as a key element in our overall transportation system in Central Florida. And when I go back and kind of reassess, I think we fell down in the communication area. I think our transportation agency did. We depended too much on the media to be our, conduit for communicating. And while the media certainly is a good way for communicating, you need to make sure that you're utilizing every other manner. And especially now with technology and with social media, you have to be, on your toes in ways that wasn't the case in the past. So I think there's no excuse for communicating and really getting people to understand and asking for people's opinions, and then valuing those opinions and incorporating them into some of the ideas and some of the plans for the future. Because, Scott, I've always found, and I used to say, for the people that we're serving in the public sector, they're out there in the community seeing things 24/7. We're not in that neighborhood necessarily 24/7 unless it's our own. And so if we don't value those opinions and those ideas and those thoughts, then we're falling down on the job. And it's so important today, and there's just no excuses, I say, for not utilizing technology as well as other means of communication.
Holly noted that we have a question. Holly, do you want to read that in for us?
Sure, guys. This is a question that says, our city is considering eliminating one of our services, specifically city fire department to a county service. Any suggestions for managing this transition not only in-house, but also with the public?
Glenda?
Well, I think you have to have a very clear message, number one, and state your case. Why is this going to be important for the people that you're serving? And I think if you can have that clear, defined message, and if you can, without putting so much detail into it that it confuses people, but how's this going to benefit me as Glenda citizen out there? And I believe that, then you ask people to, again, give their opinions. And you respond to those opinions. And I believe in the end that you'll probably get everyone not only understanding the value and the why you're doing this, but also they'll be on board and they'll be your strongest advocates. And I think that's what you always want to strive for. You want people to be advocates for you so that their voices out there in the community sending that same message.
And I know any of those times when we look at transitioning a service from within the municipality to whether it's another municipality or whether it's a private sector provider of something that was being provided by staff or whether it's contracting with the county, there are always some strong emotions that get stirred up about that. There's a sense of ownership.
Right. And that internal message is as important as the external one. I mean, you have to really manage that internal message. And I think in particular when it's a public safety service like the fire department, people feel a real attachment, and they do feel that emotion to that. So, part of what you have to do, and I don't want to oversimplify it, I was really talking more about message, so it's internal and external, but you have to have a plan in place for what's going to happen with those individuals as far as finding other jobs or whether it's an early retirement situation. Certainly pension discussions are going to come into it with fire. So it's not easy. I don't mean for people to think I'm saying that, but again, you've just got to be very clear. You've got to have those, one-on-one conversations, those group conversations. Make sure that the message is clearly understood by everybody, and the value benefits. You might even put, a list of pros and cons together. I know when we were going through, a little different than transitioning like this, but when we were annexing great acreages of property into the city of Orlando, we would not just put the pros out there, but we'd put the cons out there as well so that people could understand. So, that might be a way you want to go as well with this.
And we've talked a lot about the process the leader might want to undertake in helping their organization transition. Well, one of the things that I think most folks working in leadership recognize is there's also a really important task for the leader in terms of leading ourselves in these positions, making sure that we're doing the things we need to do internally in ourselves in order to assist the folks following us. And when we talked about this, one of the things you pointed out right away is the importance of having both clarity about what one was trying to accomplish and having that be a relatively simple picture. You want to talk about that task of leading ourselves in those terms?
Yeah, I think we all want to have purpose in our lives, and so a leader certainly needs to be able to communicate that clear, defined purpose for what they wish to accomplish. And this is really kind of the passion and the work ethic of that individual. When people understand, what the purpose is that's been clearly defined. And it also speaks to shared values and aligned vision for the whole organization. And I think the big challenge for leadership when you're going through transition and looking internally is you've really got to find a way to bring people together around around the values, the vision, that defined purpose. And when you have that unity around those, people feel good and the morale is high. One of the things that I did, and it was kind of a fun thing, we at the City of Orlando, when I became mayor, we didn't really have mission, vision, and value statements. And so we developed our vision statement and, all the other supporting statements around it. But we printed small little cards with the vision statement on, and we handed them to every employee. And every time I'd see an employee, and this is how we kind of built our culture around our vision statement, I'd ask them what it was. And some had it memorized because they knew, word was spreading that the mayor might ask you what the vision statement is. And then we put it up in letters in a prominent place. We'd, have little placards on desks and places around City Hall and in all the different departments around the city. And after a period of time, people would challenge one another. Okay, what's the vision for our city? And then they would see how it related to their individual departments or the services that they were providing. So you can have fun with things like that. And we did, and we even developed what we called city bucks. They didn't really buy anything, but it was kind of fun to pass them out if somebody got the vision statement right. So, again, having that very defined purpose for the organization, for yourself, and making sure that you bring everyone together and unify people around that. Challenging, but it can be great fun and certainly pay off in the end.
And the whole idea of simplification is reinforced by your point that when you talk about putting this on a card, I'm picturing a business card, right? Not
what it was.
Yeah. So we all know of those organizations, and some of us are members of those organizations where the vision or the mission statement or the value statement goes on for 3 paragraphs. And yes. You imagine being approached by the CEO and say, okay, tell me about our vision. It's like, because it's just too long. You need something that people can hang out.
Nothing frustrates me more than sitting in a strategic planning session with an organization, and as they develop their vision statement, I mean, it does go on and on and on. And as I say, if I can't remember it, then it's not there. You know, that's why it does have to be simple. And you know, whenever you're transitioning as a leader, you do need to kind of simplify the complexities of things, because complexity really stifles innovation, or it impedes progress, and it can adversely impact the culture. Plus, if you think about it, Scott, it can be expensive and inefficient and ineffective. And an example I'll give is a corporate board that I sit on, which I will not name, but they are so detailed and so complex about everything that I feel the people who are working there are feeling so intimidated, and they're not being allowed to be creative because there's so many parameters and walls and details and policies that make things difficult for them to be creative and to innovate and to really be progressive. And so while life is complex, and we do have complex issues that we have to deal with, you can simplify things. I think, you know, you were talking about the recent election we just went through on Tuesday. If you look at candidates' messages, some can be very complex, and if you try to repeat or explain where they stand or what they stand for, you really can't, because it's so complex. And others maybe even oversimplify on the message. So you need to find that balance somewhere where, you know, you don't get bogged down in the complexity of things, but you are able to make things simple enough that you understand it. That's important. I always say I can't remember more than 3 things, so if you can, you know, condense things to 3 statements, I'll remember them. But if you get much more complex than that, it's difficult.
The director of the Florida League of Cities University, Lynn Tipton, always says 3 points. What are your 3 points? And anything more than that, it's going to be lost. That's an excellent lesson. Now, we've been talking about purpose and direction in that sense. And again, focusing kind of on the leader himself or herself and how as a leader one engages. Let's talk a little bit about engaging people in the relationship between leadership and the people you lead, and leadership and the work you're trying to accomplish. You know, where do you put the priority in, and how do you do that?
Well, I don't think leaders can be what they want to be without people. And so that's why I say put people first. You want to make sure that the people you work with, that you treat them as a team and you treat them well and you earn their trust and respect and their loyalty in the end. And that you see those individuals as people that can be developed and fulfilled, and that your job is really one to serve others and to learn from others, and leave people better off for being led by you. Think about the very best leaders you've come in contact with, and they don't put people in a box and say, you know, you can't do this, and, you know, I'm going to oversee this and that. They really kind of free people from their boxes, and they allow them to be flexible and creative, and they create, you know, complementary teams. They're not out there trying to create people to follow them as a leader. You know, they know where their strengths are, and they want to surround themselves with people who have other strengths, and again, that complement each other. And you want to value other people and ask for opinions. So I think that's really, really important, that you always put people first and realize that nowadays especially collaborations, partnerships, teamwork is the way that you accomplish things. No one person can accomplish something alone. And if you look at the most successful initiatives out there, or the things that have been accomplished in the way that they should and will sustain on into the future, it's because it's been a team effort, and it's been a group of people who trust one another, respect one another, are loyal to each other, and who learn from one another in the process.
And as you indicated, in order to be able to put people first, one of the things that a leader has to do is to really sharpen his or her observation skills, not only of the people around them, and we tend to project, I think, sometimes onto other people something that we're feeling inside, to actually be a good observer of other people's behaviors, of their words and their actions, to get at what's going on with them, to be able to engage them, and also to be a good observer of what's going on inside ourselves.
Right. Yeah, I think you have to have that self-awareness. Again, what are your strengths? What are your skills? And, where do you need other people to complement, to help you, to teach you in many ways? So you do need to be observant. You need to be aware of yourself, of your organization. And you were touching on it. You need to value listening and engaging and learning. And Scott, I also think that it's important, we talk about leaders being authentic. And I think hand in hand with that is we need to make sure that we value sensitivity and humility. I think, again, the people that I've worked with over the years who I most admire as leaders, they have that humility, and they don't feel that they have all the answers, and they're not out there always pontificating, their position. They're asking others. And then I think it's important also to allow your positions and opinions to be challenged. And that's hard for a leader. I'll speak personally. It's hard sometimes to put something out there and say, come on, challenge me. But, I always said I don't want to put people around me who are going to tell me what they think I want to hear. I want people around me and working with me who have a difference of opinion, and where we can have this intelligent conversation and respect each other's difference of opinion. I had a planning director and a downtown development board director of the city of Orlando who would always challenge my thoughts or ideas at the city. And I can remember at first, it made me a little upset. I didn't like that. But I'll tell you, over the years, I was so grateful to both of them. And now I am much more knowledgeable in the area of planning and community development issues because of what they taught me, and because they challenged some of the ideas that I thought were good, and they helped me change my mind. And as a leader, it is okay to change your mind because you're growing and you're developing in your leadership. You need to make sure, that politically, because we have to deal with politics and local government, that you state your case as far as why and what the value and benefit is, why you may have shifted your ideas or opinions on things. But you need to keep that open mind and be willing to accept a difference of opinion. Very important.
We're getting close to the end here, but I know you had one other note about leading ourselves in transition when we talked before this program. You talked about the importance of a leader getting personal, and I wanted you to just take a minute and say what you mean by that.
Yeah, and I'll keep it brief, but I don't think there's anything more personal than leadership. And sometimes people say, oh, well, this is just business, this isn't personal. Well, that's not true. We know that everything is personal in leadership. And so leaders have to engage with people. We have to get to know people and care for those who are around us and with whom we work. And I think the strength of a good leader is when they display empathy and they display kindness and compassion, and they're helping others be successful. I think of so many of the people that I had the great opportunity to work with and learn from, both at the city and then at the state level. And today, they're some of my closest friends, those former employees, because, you know, I got to know them personally. I knew their families and about their families. I knew if they were going through difficult times. You know, I knew and tried to help them learn and be a better person. And I've been able to watch them grow in their careers and take on new responsibilities. And it's very gratifying to see that. But that's what I mean when I say get personal. It's okay to be close to people. People understand the pecking order in an organization, but it's still okay to know people and to really know them and to care for them and to help them be the best that they can be.
And I know that can be very challenging in a leadership role because leaders are often evaluators and they may have to make those tough decisions about folks that we come to know well and to appreciate and respect.
Right.
It's hard, but it's...
Where you have to be honest with people too. And I think when you've built that level of trust and respect, you can be very honest with people and very candid about things. And when those difficult discussions come up, or if you have to move people on to something else in their responsibilities or to a different organization even, you know, you've built that mutual respect, and you've been able to develop a relationship. It kind of goes back to that very first point, developing the relationship again.
Well, Glenda, I think we're just about at the end of our time. I want to remind people, if you're listening to this on our webinar archive on the Florida League of Cities website, and you do have a question, you'd like to follow up on something that you heard today from former Orlando Mayor Glenda Hood, please email me, Scott Paine, at Paine, that's S-P-A-I-N-E, at flcities.com, and I'll be happy to answer the question if I can answer it, or to get back with Mayor Hood and make sure that we get a chance to have that answer. A couple things coming up for those of you who are listening, events that you might want to tune in for. Next, online learning opportunities. As Holly mentioned at the beginning of the program, we're doing a monthly online learning opportunity around 3 themes. Today's was leadership. In December, we'll be talking about public opinion. December 1st, our session at 2 o'clock on Thursday, December 1st, will be what our citizens are thinking, and it'll be a deep dive into the information behind the election outcomes. We're not going to be focused so much on why a certain person voted for a certain candidate so much as what we have learned about the electorate, about the American public from what unfolded last Tuesday. My guest will be Steve Van Cor, and we'll have a lively conversation, I'm sure, about that. Then in the new year, on Thursday, January 12th, again at 2 o'clock, our ethics law update, cases and controversies. Don't know yet what we're going to be picking up thematically, but we'll have a good conversation about some of the latest developments in ethics law in the state of Florida and ethical concerns that we need to address as public leaders. And then in February 9th, on that Thursday again at 2, we'll be returning to the topic of leadership. Outside of the online world, there also are some important upcoming FLCU and FLC events you might want to put on your calendar. December 8th and 9th is the FLC Legislative Conference at the Embassy Suites Orlando, Lake Buena Vista South. That's an important event for FLC members when we will adopt our legislative priorities for the coming state legislative session. Just before that, on December 7th, the Center for Municipal Research and Innovation will be having a research symposium, part of the year-long effort to support President Susan Haney's initiative, Safe Cities, Safe Florida. The symposium will be focused on the Zika battle, a collaborative approach, and help us as city officials really engage our role in helping protect public health in this area. And then later in January 20th through 22nd, it's an opportunity for elected officials in our cities to learn kind of the soup to nuts, foundational knowledge about doing the job of an elected municipal official at the FLCU Institute for Elected Municipal Officials. That'll be in the Hilton at Cocoa Beach. Glenda, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences and your wisdom with me and with our audience.
Thank you, Scott. I enjoyed it very much, and I just want to say thank you to all those who serve us in our communities at the local level in government, because there's no finer job that's done in this state than that. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Glenda. And Holly, thank you very much. It's all yours.